The crystal vase shattered against the marble floor with a sound that echoed through the mansion like a gunshot. 7-year-old Isabella Montgomery stood frozen in the doorway of her father's study, her small hands still trembling from the force of her throw. Behind her, the 23rd maid in 18 months gathered her belongings with the same defeated expression as all the others before her. "She's impossible," the woman muttered, shaking her head as she stuffed her uniform into a worn duffel bag. "Absolutely impossible. That child needs professional help, not a maid." Richard Montgomery barely looked up from his laptop screen as another caregiver walked out of his daughter's life. The tech mogul had built an empire worth $3 billion, but he couldn't keep a single person willing to care for his own child for more than 3 weeks. The irony wasn't lost on him, though he'd stopped finding it amusing months ago. Isabella retreated to her room, slamming the door so hard the imported Italian door frame rattled. Inside her princess-themed bedroom that cost more than most people's homes, she curled up in the corner behind an enormous dollhouse she'd never played with. The silence that followed felt heavier than the chaos that had preceded it. This was her world now, a cycle of new faces, broken promises, and inevitable abandonment. At 7 years old, Isabella had learned that people left, always. First her mother, taken by cancer when Isabella was 4, then a parade of nannies, housekeepers, and caregivers who arrived with bright smiles and departed with frustrated sighs. 3 days later, Maria Santos stood at the front gates of the Montgomery estate, clutching a single suitcase and a letter of recommendation that was more hope than qualification. At 52, with graying hair pulled back in a simple bun and hands weathered by decades of hard work, she looked nothing like the polished professionals who typically answered Richard's advertisements. The butler who let her in, a kind man named Harold who'd watched 23 women flee these halls, gave her a sympathetic look. "Are you quite certain about this position, Mom?" he asked gently. "The young miss can be challenging." Maria's dark eyes sparkled with something Harold hadn't seen in the faces of her predecessors. Genuine curiosity rather than determination to fix or control. "I've raised 5 children of my own," she said simply, "and buried 2. I think I can handle whatever challenges a little girl might bring." The first test came within an hour. Isabella appeared at the top of the grand staircase like a tiny general surveying enemy territory. She wore a white dress that had cost more than Maria's monthly salary, but her expression was pure 7-year-old defiance. "Are you the new maid?" Isabella called down, her voice carrying the imperious tone she'd perfected over months of warfare. "I am," Maria replied, not moving from her position at the bottom of the stairs. She didn't demand Isabella come down. She didn't launch into cheerful introductions or promises about how much fun they'd have together. She simply waited. Isabella descended 3 steps, then stopped. "The last one cried when I put salt in her coffee. The one before that quit when I hid her car keys. What are you going to do when I'm mean to you? Maria considered this question with the seriousness it deserved. I suppose I'll be sad, she said finally. But I'll try to understand why you feel you need to be mean. This was not the answer Isabella had expected. She came down another 2 steps. My daddy says I'm difficult. All the maids say I'm impossible. Maybe. Maria nodded. But I think you're probably also scared and lonely and missing your mama something fierce. The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. No, and Ian, not the child psychologists her father had hired, not the 23 previous caregivers. Not even her father himself had ever spoken about her mother so directly. The little girl's carefully constructed armor cracked, just slightly. That evening, Maria did something unprecedented in the Montgomery household. She ate dinner in the kitchen instead of serving it in the formal dining room. She didn't ask Isabella to join her. She didn't set up elaborate activities or promise magical adventures. She simply sat at the wooden kitchen table with a simple meal and waited. Isabella appeared in the doorway like a curious ghost. Why aren't you eating in the big dining room? Too fancy for me. Maria shrugged. I like kitchens better. They feel more like home. This isn't your home, Isabella pointed out, but there was less venom in her voice than usual. No, Maria agreed. But maybe it could feel a little bit like one. The breakthrough came 2 weeks later. Isabella had been unusually quiet, which in the Montgomery house was typically a sign of impending disaster. Maria found her in her mother's old art studio, a room that had been locked and untouched since Catherine Montgomery's death 3 years earlier. Somehow, Isabella had gotten inside. The little girl sat on the floor surrounded by canvases, paintbrushes, and half-finished artwork. She was holding a photograph for her mother painting at this very easel, laughing at something beyond the camera's view. She was beautiful, Maria said softly, settling beside Isabella on the dusty floor. You have her eyes. I don't remember her laugh anymore, Isabella whispered. The first vulnerable words she'd spoken to any caregiver. I try and try, but I can't remember what it sounded like. Maria's heart broke for this little girl who'd been carrying such enormous grief in such a tiny body. Would you like to tell me about her? Sometimes talking about people we love helps us remember them better. What followed was an hour of stories of fragmented memories of bedtime songs, painting sessions, and the way Catherine Montgomery had made even ordinary Tuesday afternoons feel magical. For the first time since her mother's death, Isabella spoke about her mama without anger or defensive walls. She used to say that love doesn't leave when people do, Isabella said finally, but I don't understand what that means. I think, Maria said carefully, it means the love is still here, inside you. It's what makes you fight so hard when you're scared. It's what makes you test every new person who comes into your life, because you want to make sure they're strong enough to stay. That night, Isabella asked if Maria would read her a bedtime story, not demanded, not manipulated or asked. The next morning, She ate breakfast at the kitchen table instead of demanding room service. Small changes, but in the Montgomery house, they felt revolutionary. The real test came 3 weeks later when Isabella woke up with a fever. Every previous caregiver had called Richard immediately, following protocol to involve medical professionals and maintain proper boundaries. Maria did something different. She made chicken soup from scratch, sat beside Isabella's bed with cool washcloths, and hummed lullabies in Spanish that her own grandmother had sung decades before. "Are you going to leave when I'm better?" Isabella asked weakly, her small hand finding Maria's weathered one. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," Isabella whispered. "But everyone always leaves." "Not everyone," Maria said firmly. "Some people stay. Some people choose to love you even when you're difficult or scared or testing them to see if they're strong enough." Richard Montgomery found them the next morning, his daughter asleep in Maria's lap, both of them curled up in the rocking chair that had sat unused in Isabella's room for 3 years. For the first time since Catherine's death, his child looked peaceful. "She trusts you," he said quietly, not wanting to wake them. "She's testing me," Maria corrected gently. "But I think we're making progress." 6 months later, the Montgomery house had transformed. Not the physical structure of the marble floors still gleamed and the crystal chandeliers still cast rainbow patterns on the walls. But the atmosphere had changed completely. Laughter echoed through halls that had known only silence. Isabella painted pictures in her mother's studio, with Maria teaching her color-mixing techniques learned from decades of watching her own children create. The little girl still had difficult days. She still struggled with anger and grief and the complex emotions of a child processing enormous loss. But now she had someone who saw beyond the behavior to the hurting heart beneath. Someone who stayed through tantrums and tears, who celebrated small victories, and who understood that healing wasn't a destination but a journey. On a sunny Tuesday afternoon, Isabella ran into the kitchen where Maria was preparing lunch. "Maria, I remembered something." "What's that, mi amor?" Mama's laugh. "I remembered what it sounded like." It was like wind chimes in summer. Happy and light and musical. Isabella paused, her face serious. "And I think she would have liked you. She would have been happy that you stayed." Maria knelt down to Isabella's eye level, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "I think she would be proud of you too, for being brave enough to let someone new love you." That evening, Richard Montgomery did something he hadn't done in months. He came home early. He found Maria and Isabella in the garden, planting flowers in the beds that Catherine had loved but that had stood barren for 3 years. "Daddy," Isabella called, dirt smudged on her cheek and joy radiating from her small face. "Look, we're planting Mama's favorite roses. Maria says love grows best when you tend it carefully and give it room to bloom." As Richard watched his daughter truly happy for the first time since Catherine's death, he understood what Maria had accomplished. She hadn't fixed Isabella or erased her grief or trauma. She'd done something far more profound. She'd shown a broken little girl that some people do stay, that love doesn't always leave, and that healing is possible when someone is patient enough to see past the thorns to the beautiful soul beneath. The impossible had become possible, not through force or expertise or professional training, but through the simple, revolutionary act of staying, of choosing love over convenience, patience over perfection, and hope over the easier path of walking away. In a world that often teaches children to be strong, Maria had taught Isabella something more valuable, that she was worthy of being loved exactly as she was, difficult days and all. And sometimes, that's the most impossible thing of all and the most necessary.